So great, thanks so much for attending, everyone, this evening. So I'm Matt Lewandowski, one of the faculty who work here with the students at the Fels Institute of Government. You're probably also seeing Mindy Zacharias, who's our program director. So what we're gonna do is I'm going to share my screen and go over a brief PowerPoint presentation. It takes roughly 25-ish minutes for us to go through that. Then we'll open it up to some Q&A. If you have a question while the PowerPoint's going on, you can go ahead and throw that up in the chat. And if it's straightforward, Minnie will kind of respond to it as we're going through. If not, if it's something that maybe is going to take a little bit longer to respond to, we'll kind of hold it and we'll go over it in the Q&A once we finish with that. So I'm going to go ahead and this, so you should now all be seeing this. And okay, so thanks so much everyone for coming to our first information session for the 2020-2021 academic year here at the Fels Institute of Government. So the Fels Institute of Government has a really long and very storied history. Right, so it's been around for more than 80 years, and I would like to begin with this slide. So the first shot that you saw there, that red brick building, this is the same red brick building you're actually seeing here in this photo. In fact, this scene takes place just outside of where we usually hold these information sessions on the first floor of the Fels Mansion. So the man you see speaking at the microphone is Samuel Fels, who has both a tremendous amount and nothing at all to do with public administration. So why did I give that slightly cheeky answer? So in some ways he has nothing at all to do with it because he wasn't someone who did public administration. He ran a soap company, the Fels Naphtha Soap Company. It was what his father had founded, then he and his brother ran it throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And then he became, as kind of a wealthy, leading Philadelphian, very involved in philanthropy, concerned about the problem of corruption in Philadelphia. So there's a famous report by the muckraker Lincoln Steffens that said Philadelphia was the most corrupt city in America. And at the time, during the Gilded Age, that really was something of an accomplishment. Mr. Fels brought together a set of leaders within the city of Philadelphia to say, we really need to do something to train better public servants to be involved with government, people who are highly skilled and who will be able to help us avoid the problems of corruption and ill governance that have plagued this city, right? So the kind of launching of that conference led Fels to then found something called the Institute for State and Local Government, and then when he died, he gave his mansion to that institute, so then became the Fels Institute of Government, a name we carry with us to this day, right? So for more than 8 decades, right, Fels has been leading the way to training the next generation of public sector leaders, right? So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what makes Fels unique. I'll share a little bit about some of our students as we do that. I'll talk a little bit about our curriculum, and then I'll wrap up with some other kind of information about our degrees and programs. So what makes Fels unique, right? There's a lot of places where you can get an MPA degree. Why would you want to come study at Fels? And we think what we offer is the best combination of practical, analytical, and personal, right? So what does that mean, right? That there are maybe other places that can do one of these better, but we think we give you the best approach that combines all 3 of these things. So let's break down what we mean by each one of these separate factors. What do we mean by practical? Well, we are a hands-on sort of place where we want students to really do things in the real world, right? So we obviously believe strongly in theory, but we think that theory always has to be paired with praxis, right? So in all of our courses, we try to incorporate course projects, right? So for example, in Professor Russell's class in program evaluation, they work with real data sets from the city of Philadelphia, right? In Professor DeBernardinis' class on public management and leadership, they go through different initiatives the city has undertaken, from the Rebuild Initiative to Zero Waste and Litter, right, to Parks and Rec, right, and understand how these things actually work in the real world, right? So while we try to give you lots of theory, we also show you how that practice is working in the real world. Second, we also pair for all of our full-time students a required internship, right? So that you take the skills you learn in the classroom and put them to use out there in an actual job. And then everyone, both full-time and executive students, does a capstone project where they bring together the skills that they've learned during the program, and they learn how to pull it together and solve a problem for a real world organization. So I think what's really neat about that is that it's not just, you know, a kind of class project or something. You actually work hand in hand with an organization. They give you a real challenge that they need to solve. And then you say, okay, how do I take the skills I've learned in this program and help them solve this challenge? Now that challenge can take a lot of different forms. That might be helping them develop a new strategic plan. That might be helping them to do a program evaluation, right? That might be helping them, right, to figure out a kind of planning exercise, right? There's lots of different forms those capstones have taken. I think what unites them all is a real focus on making an actual deliverable for a real world organization. And so Matt Forrest, who graduated in 2019, I think is a nice example of this. Right, so Matt came to Fels after having worked with City Year for several years, and was really interested in understanding how to do things in a very practical, hands-on way. Worked with LISC, which is a local kind of nonprofit umbrella and local government umbrella, to help them develop kind of a better sort of toolkit for their members to understand how to interface with different kinds of government agencies, right? So really putting those practical skills to the test. But of course, you don't just need practical skills, you also need analytical skills as well, right? So we think that you really need to know different kinds of things now than you might have needed to know 25 years ago, right? So a lot of the core is still the same, but we live in a modern data-driven world, right? People need to know statistics and data science, right? And if you're, nervous and you say, oh, I don't like statistics, they scare me, don't worry. I actually, so I'm the one who kind of started that sequence here at Fels, and I passed it on. Now one of my former students now teaches it, and she's fantastic. She will put you at ease with statistics. She's a fantastic teacher. And so you'll see that as many students in the past have, they'll come in saying, oh, that's my least favorite class. And they'll come out saying, oh, I actually like it a lot, right? We think you also need to know something about economics and public finance, so you understand how governments and nonprofits set budgets, right? And government policy helps to shape economic decisions that both public and private actors make, right? And you need to know something about leadership and policy as well, right? What is the public policy process? How do you interface with it, right? How do you drive things forward, right? So that you're not just a manager, but you're someone driving change, you're a leader. And I think Pauline is a nice example of this. So she also graduated in 2019. Actually, I think all three of our students in the deck did. And Pauline's an interesting case. She was yet again someone else who came in and said, oh, I don't know about the statistics, but took some classes, she found love with it, and then went to work for the DA's office here in Philadelphia and helped them do the program evaluation when the DA's office started phasing out cash bail, right? So that's a case where, you really have to know, your data, your statistics, how you're going to analyze that data, because this isn't just a class project, right? This is something that a lot of people are going to be looking at, and public policy decisions are going to be made by it. Right? So that's why you need these sorts of skills, right, to drive change forward in the real world. Finally, you need to do all this from a personal perspective, right? Lots of places can give you the first two things, but if you go to somewhere like the Harris School or the Ford School or the Wilson School, you're going to be a cohort of 100, 250, 500 students in your class. You're going to be a cohort of 30. It makes a big difference, right? We're going to be able to give you individualized career services and mentoring with Colleen, who's our fantastic career services coordinator. She, meets with each student and helps them figure out what their skills are, where they've been, where they want to go, the kinds of things they're looking to pick up in their degree, right? We'll talk later on a little bit about our mentoring program, where we pair each student with some of them are Fels alums, some of them are just kind of, folks we know kind of in the general area, right, who's kind of taken a similar path. And it's just a way for you to connect with someone else, expand your network a little bit, and talk with someone else. Okay, you've achieved position X in the public sector. I'd really like to go there. How can I do that? What are the kinds of things that I need to do to be successful in this sort of career? Right? It's also a customizable degree. We'll talk a little bit later on, just briefly, about some dual degrees that we offer. But that's one way of doing it. But even for folks that don't want to pursue a dual degree, right? We have a core curriculum, but we also have some elective choices that really allow you to make the program your own. Right? And you'll do this in a small cohort, where I always tell people, I think the connections you make to the faculty and to the speakers and the guests that we bring in are really valuable. But in some ways, the most valuable thing is actually the connections you make to the people in your cohort and the cohorts around you, right? I used to be surprised, but I've stopped being surprised, as I know this is just the kind of place that Fels is, that I'll meet people who are alumni who graduated 30 years ago, and they'll tell me, oh, I still talk, every couple months to 5 different people, that I graduated with. And, we formed lifelong bonds with one another. And that matters a lot, right? And so I think Sarah is another person who's a good example of this. She took advantage of the customizability by combining her MPA with her Master of Science in Social Policy in the School of Social Policy and Practice. And I think she is another good example of someone who came in, wasn't excited about the kind of analytical skills, but then when she saw that she could work on issues of homelessness and housing security, which are her real passion, right? She was like, oh, I really can see how you can use these things, and then work through the Fels network, right, to connect her to the sort of job that she was ultimately interested in having, right? So that shows you a little bit how you can learn to take theory and practice, that analytical and practical, and marry them, and do so within the context of a highly personalized program. And we think that gives you a pretty unique edge if you're interested in pursuing a career in the public sector. So, I always talk about, we're analytical, we're practical, and we're personal. And I always say we kind of have another half of a P, and that's that we're rooted in Philadelphia, right? So I say we're rooted in Philadelphia because we have a long tradition, as I mentioned. Samuel Fels, when he founded the Institute, was really concerned about the city of Philadelphia. And we honor those roots. I think if you know anything about kind of City Hall and in the kind of structure of Philadelphia city government, you know that there are literally hundreds of Fels graduates working throughout the city government, throughout the region, throughout state government. But I always say we sit in Philadelphia and we're rooted here and we're proud of those roots, but we look out to the world. So we have Fels alumni that work not just in this area or in this region, but in DC, in New York, in California, right? And indeed around the globe, right? So we're rooted here, but we look out to a broader community as well. So let's talk a little bit about the 2 different degree programs that Fels offers. Okay, so we'll talk about the full-time and executive MPA programs. We'll kind of skip over the certificates. I'll explain what that is when we get to it. So let's start with the full-time MPA. So this is a 12-month program that involves 9 CUs of coursework. And this is directed at students who have an average of 2 to 4 years of post-baccalaureate experience. Now, there are plenty of students who are going to come straight from undergraduate into this program, and plenty of students who have significantly more than 2 to 4 years of work experience. That's just a rough kind of average, right? So this is really aimed at people who say, okay, I have a year, I can pause my career, come back to school full time, and know that at the end of that year, I'm going to be getting the degree that's going to help me move to the next stage of my career, right? And so this is an on-campus degree. This year, I guess we should say on-campus means at least for the fall semester hybrid, but normally we'd be just meeting in a regular kind of face-to-face classroom. Okay, so basically the course plan for this, right? Remember I told you there were 3 tracks of data, or 3 tracks of classes, right? And then an individualized component to it. So the curriculum is set up So you take 9 courses and do an internship across 3 semesters. So how does that work? So in the fall, so our current students who just started, gosh, a month ago, time flies, are taking this first set of courses. They're doing statistics for public policy, doing public economics and public law and public processes, right? And they're also taking their first elective. One of the cool things about the electives is that you can literally take almost anything you want. So we offer some electives in Fels. So I think this semester we're offering a class on housing policy, and we're offering a class on public speaking and something else that's escaping me. Oh, who gets elected and why. But there are electives that people can take in social policy, in criminology, in housing policy in Wharton, in city planning, which is here in the School of Design, right? There are, other electives people have taken in applied economics, right? In the School of Public Health, right? There are electives all over campus. Basically, if you're interested in it, there's almost certainly going to be a class on it at Penn. I'm always kind of amazed at the diversity of things that people manage to find to take here and how interesting all of them are, right? I really think one of the great things about studying at Penn is that, it has really strong programs in almost everything, right? So chances are, if you're interested in it, there's someone else on campus who's teaching a class about it. In the spring, what you'll do is you'll take a second class in each one of those tracks that builds on the first class. So you'll do program evaluation, which is going to take the tools of statistics and show you how to use them to see if public programs are actually working or not. You'll use the tools of public economics to understand public finance, right, and understand the ways in which government policy, matters, and that's really essential for people who are going to work in state and local government, right? We've actually been hearing a lot about this in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis, right? Not just the increased cost of responding to COVID itself, but the consequences of the economic fallout in terms of reduced taxes, increased demand for social services, right? This is a really important topic at all times, but especially at this point in time. And then you'll build on the public law and processes class with public management and leadership, where you'll learn how to take those tools and drive change forward in the public sector. You'll also take your second elective, right, which again is going to allow you to build on whatever kind of topic of interest you started with in the fall, or even something different. Then finally in the summer, what you'll do is you'll complete your capstone project and you'll take your internship. I say complete the capstone project, right, because it really begins kind of in the spring semester. So we have a kind of system set up to match students, and then they start doing work on it in the spring so that you're kind of finishing up over the summer while you're doing your internship, right? So within that 12-month period, right, it's an intense process, but we really think it gives you the skills that you need, right, to get you where you need to go. Now, we also offer a second program for people who are working full-time and will only want to go to school, part-time. So this is our executive program. It's a 21-month part-time program. Now, this is for people who have typically significantly more work experience. Although again, it's going to be a big range, right? Some people are only going to have a few years experience. Some people are going to have 20, 25 years work experience. It really kind of varies from person to person, right? So that 5 to 10 years is just a very rough average. And so what this program does is it is going to meet normally, right, once a week on Monday evenings. You'll meet in the evening for a class over Zoom. And then once a month, you come together for an intensive weekend on campus as its normal kind of schedule, right? So that's why we say it has a mix of on-campus and virtual learning. So this is going to be a little bit different in that it's 21 months. So it's 1 full year and then 1 academic year after that. So here, because it's a part-time program, you're only going to take 2 classes per semester. So you'll start off by taking statistics and public management. Then you'll move on and take program evaluation and public economics. Then you'll go on and take a public finance class and the performance imperative, right, which is another class about how to use performance management to drive change in the public sector. Then in the fall of your second year, you'll take 2 electives, And then in the spring of your second year, right, you'll take your final elective and you'll complete your capstone, right? So that notice it's a very, very similar structure, just split up now. Instead of running over 2 semesters full-time, it's running over 5 semesters part-time, right? Because you can't take as many classes. Okay. We offer some certificates for currently enrolled students. So these are ways of deepening your degree if you're interested in one of these areas. So you can kind of combine some classes at Fels with some classes elsewhere in the university. I'm happy to, I won't dwell on them now, but happy to answer questions about them in the Q&A. So just to give you a sample, I said that, you know, we offer a variety of different electives, and these are just ones we offer here at Fels, right? There's going to be literally hundreds more offered across the university. So we've offered classes on conducting negotiations, on public communications, which is about how you present your message and convey your point through public speaking and public communication. Government relations, right? So how do you lobby effectively? Ones on politics, policy, and religion and how that intersects with the upcoming election. Certainly one that's very timely at the moment as we're considering, you know, a new Supreme Court justice, and there could be, you know, important debates in the confirmation hearing about that person's perspective on issues like the Roe v. Wade case or the Obergefell decision, right? Classes on urban housing policy, right? Classes on, you know, children in the law and leading nonprofits, right? Data science for public policy. So really, you know, we run the gamut across a whole wide range of things here at Fels. And as I mentioned before, I think one of the things we do really nicely is we give you customized career services, again, because it's relatively small, right? So how are we, you know, kind of doing that? Well, part of that's going to be, as I talked about, with that one-on-one career counseling with Colleen, but we also do a variety of other things to help you, right? So your internship and capstone are often an important way that students go and get jobs, right? Because you're making connections with those organizations, and that worked for several students this year. We've got that mentoring program that I mentioned where we're pairing you up with a more senior mentor, right? We have our public policy and practice speaker series run by our senior fellow, Elizabeth Vale. You can find out more information about that on our website, where we bring in a kind of high level speaker. We've got some great folks this fall. We had Wally Idenyo from the Obama Foundation come and speak a few weeks ago. We've got Pennsylvania Secretary of Health Rachel Levine coming to talk about her experience leading the state through the COVID-19 pandemic. And then perhaps most excitingly, right after the election, we'll be having Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren come and speak with us. And what's really cool about public policy and practice is it's a large event that's open to the public, right? Because these are relatively high profile folks. But we always have a little session just for Fels students where those people get to meet in a group. Usually we have 6 or 10 Fels students who get to, you know, take them to lunch and just kind of have a kind of one-on-one conversation with someone who's a kind of distinguished public leader. We also do a variety of career talks as well as our advising. So career talks are just where we bring someone in and they talk about how they got the career they have. And then finally, the Fels Alumni Network and QuakerNet, which is Penn's internal alumni database, are great. The Fels alumni are both large and really passionate about Fels. So, you know, they all love talking to, you know, current Fels students, and they love connecting them with opportunities, right? And that, you know, certainly that goes true for anyone in the mentoring program, but even more broadly, you know, everyone who I meet who's a Fels alum and they find I have something to do with Fels, they tell me how much they love to meet the students and find out what they're doing and connect them with other, you know, opportunities, because they all say, well, someone did that for me and I want to help pay that forward. So obviously, right, one of the concerns about coming to a place like Penn is, can I afford this? And, you know, obviously there's a cost, but I want to convey that we've worked as hard as we can to make this as affordable as possible, right? So we've worked to reduce the time to degree and the number of courses students have, but we've also worked to expand our scholarships and financial aid. So for students who need it, which basically it's open to all full-time students, right? We give them something we call public leadership and service, or a PLAS fellowship. And what that is it's a grant of up to $5,000 to help them take a public sector internship that doesn't pay, right? Unfortunately, if you know anything about the public sector, there are many internship opportunities, almost none of them pay. So we wanted people to take the right internship rather than an internship that paid, because we know, everyone's got to, pay the rent and eat and, do those sorts of things. So we give people that grant to help them finance the right kind of internship for them, right? So they get the skills they need to succeed in the public sector. We also offer something that we're very proud of that we call the 15 for 5 program. So for people who have 5 years of public service, whether that's in the military or in state and local government or the federal government, right? So if you have 5 years of government service, then you can qualify for a $15,000 scholarship. So we've had a number of students come that way. So people who've worked in local government, people who've worked in the federal government, and actually a number of military folks who want to take what they learned in the military and apply that to other types of public service as well. So that's something I think is a really cool kind of outgrowth of it. Finally, we have a whole number of partner organizations. We're just about to sign a new one, but we've got great ones with City Year and AmeriCorps and the Peace Corps and Teach for America and Teach for All, and a number of other, the Bonner Foundation, a couple of other organizations, right? And all these partner groups are places that encourage young people to get involved with service. And so what we say is, okay, if you're an alumnus of, say, Teach for America or AmeriCorps, and we admit you, we will waive your application fee, and we will give you at least $8,000 in scholarship aid. And so why do we do this? Well, we do it because we know from our past experience that the students who are from those types of organizations are our best students, right? Because they've really demonstrated a dedication and a commitment to public service, which for us is one of our hallmarks that we look at when we're evaluating students in the application process. We really want to see people, right, who have a passion for working in the public sector and who want to drive change forward. And, if you've spent 2 years, doing Teach for America or AmeriCorps or a similar program, then you've demonstrated that. We want to reward that with a scholarship, right? And we certainly also have some other general scholarships as well. Our strategy is to give as many people as we can some aid, so no one's getting a full ride. I wish we could do that. Unfortunately, we can't. But we try to give everyone some aid to help them defray the cost of pursuing a Fels degree. So let's talk a little bit about some application deadlines. I know it still seems like a long way away, but our deadline will be here before you know it. So if you're interested for applying for that full-time, that 1-year degree program, that comes in that deadline is in January, in mid-January. But we also have a priority deadline of mid-December. We can talk about that if you're interested. The executive MPA deadline is going to be rolling, and that'll be in May when that one comes due. But that's a rolling admissions process. So if you're interested in applying, don't wait until May because we admit students and spend down our financial aid budget on a rolling basis. So if you're interested, definitely be in touch with Mindy and we'll talk to you about getting started on an application, because you can certainly do that sooner. So the requirements for applying, you're going to need to fill out an online application. You can find the link to do that from our website. It's basically just going to record all your basic, demographic information. You need to upload a resume. You need to upload a personal statement, which for us has 2 parts. So the first part explains why Fels is a good fit for you and why you want to pursue a public sector degree. And I think those 2 things really go hand in hand, right? So why is it that you want to work in the public sector, and why is Fels the right step for you to get to where you want to go in the public sector? So I always find personal statement a little misleading. It's not your, kind of personal story or something, right? It's really kind of your chance to sell yourself to us, right? Why are you someone, when we read this file, that we're going to say, yes, that's someone we absolutely have to have in our next cohort of 30 students. And then the second part of that is we ask you to talk about a time when you used data to drive a decision, because that's one of the kind of hallmarks here at Fels, right? And so that takes on a lot of different forms. For some people, they'll talk about their job, but other people talk about an experience they had in school, or maybe student government, or a different organization. So there's lots of different ways of demonstrating. We kind of want to see your thinking and your decision-making skills in that. Next, you have to submit your transcript, so all of your, kind of school transcripts, and then 2 letters of recommendation. So those can be from the 2 people you think can speak best to your promise in the program. That might be 2 faculty members. It might be a faculty member and a boss. It might be, 2 bosses. We'll leave it up to you, but think about the people who can best speak to why you would, be a good fit here at Fels. And then for students who are interested in applying for the full-time program, they have to submit either a GRE or LSAT score. People who are applying for the executive program who have at least 5 years of work experience do not need to submit their test scores. They're optional, but all full-time students do. So one of the questions we get a lot from people is, well, maybe I don't have the strongest academic record, right? I had someone come up a few years ago and say, look, I kind of screwed around a little bit in college. I didn't really kind of figure out what I wanted to do until, close to the end. And so my grades aren't great, but I've got good work experience. That's totally okay. Look, we're going to take your academic background into account, but part of what I tell people is your, job in selecting who writes your letters of recommendation, doing your personal statement and essay is showing us the full you, right? And so if one part of your application is a little bit weaker, right, talk about your, you can acknowledge that and talk about how you're going to build on your strengths while you're here, right? So maybe if your academic credentials, weren't the best, right, you didn't find your way until the end of college, and hey, we all know that happens. Talk about how you learned from that, how you're going to do better, here, because you're going to be, more focused, and show us evidence of that. So show us your commitment to public service, and show us, what steps you're taking to do that, right? So it's up to you to kind of use the application process, right, to show us why, we really want to have you as part of our next class. So that's a lot of information and a lot of me talking at you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I will open it up to questions. So Mindy, do you maybe want to start with some questions that people had put in the chat?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you guys for the questions. I think I addressed most of them as they came in. One, just to clarify, is the deadlines. So for the full-time program, the priority deadline is December 1st. The regular deadline is January 15th. That's on the website. And I think because you're on this webinar, you'll automatically get reminded of that. So sorry that the slide was out of date. And then there were also some questions about the 15 for 5 scholarship and what qualifies for that. So political campaign work doesn't count because it's not government work. It's for a candidate or a private organization, but working for the government does count. And now we can get to some questions that we haven't gotten to yet. Let's see, the first one is, what percentage of admitted students are international students?
Yeah, great question. So, Fels is a domestically focused program by and large. So most of our students are going to come from the US, but every year we've got, a number of students, I don't exactly know how many we have this year, but quite a number, I would say at least 6 or 7. And that's pretty standard. We've got folks from all over the world. We think that adds a really valuable, perspective, right? And so we like having international students here every year. But, when we talk to international students, what I always tell them is it is a more kind of domestically focused program. So the international students who do best here are ones who really want to understand the American system best. right? And get a very deep understanding of that, maybe get a little bit of work experience here, and then, either continue to work in the US or take those lessons, back to their home country.
Great. Another specific question from Mallory. Can you write an addendum if you had a rough semester due to COVID or personal reasons? So yes, you can definitely, you'll combine, you'll have your personal statement and then the second essay prompt in the same document, and you can add any additional context there. We also understand, we went through the COVID situation with all of our students. Penn went to an optional pass-fail, so we sort of understand that. Everyone has a transcript notation. Matt, anything you want to add to that?
No, and I think that's exactly right. Like those are the the sorts of things we look at. So I actually, what I always tell people is, if you had a rough semester, there's something that happened, we'll notice it, so don't pretend it didn't happen. Like, just sort of say, look, and sometimes that happens, right? A relative dies, you get sick, there's personal stuff going on, we understand that. So just, I think if you explain it, it helps us better put it into context, so we can say, yeah, that really was an aberration, and that person was otherwise, a strong student.
Great. See, the next question is from Rich. Can I receive the 15 for 5 scholarship if I'm also receiving partial GI Bill benefit for the executive program? Yes.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've also encouraged folks in the situation to look at is Penn is a yellow ribbon partner, so folks who served in Iraq and Afghanistan can also qualify for yellow ribbon benefits as well.
Great. So we have a question from Blake. Does a Fulbright grant count as one of the qualifying scholarships? And can I take creative writing as an elective?
We don't have a partnership with the Fulbright program, unfortunately. So even if we don't have a formal partnership with organizations, if it's when we evaluate the application, we can sort of consider it for aid. We could certainly look at that as something that's akin to a partner organization, and consider that as part of our kind of overall financial decision calculations for that student. Could you take creative writing? That's interesting. No one's ever asked for that particular class before. I think if you could, I'll be honest, I'm a little bit skeptical, but I'd be willing to be convinced that if you think you can make a case that creative writing is going to be valuable for the public sector, we'd at least be willing to entertain it.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. Generally, when you're picking your electives, you'll consult with your advisors. So Colleen, who Matt mentioned, or myself, or others on the team, and really trying to think about, what are your goals? What do you want to get out of the program? And then what are the most effective ways to sort of fill what you need? Is it through an elective class or through your internship or a capstone or different networking? So we encourage folks to be really intentional about selecting electives that are really going to set them up well for their future goals. We have a question from Io. Is an interview process part of the application process?
We do interview some folks, so it can be, we don't always interview all applicants, but so don't read anything into it if you get one or not. It's just, we sort of wish we had the capacity to interview everyone. Unfortunately, it's not quite possible with the size of staff we have.
What's the normal cohort size for the full-time program, asks Mallory.
So, our aim for that is roughly kind of 30-ish students. I think this year we have 29, 30?
29.
So we're just about right. So, it varies a little bit from year to year, but, that's kind of roughly the range. 25 to 35 is kind of where we're shooting for.
This is a great question from Dami. Would the program be willing to accept those looking to pivot professionally into public service, or is Fels geared toward those already in public service?
No, absolutely. We have students every year who come in and say, oh, I really want to make a pivot. And again, I think this is something where, diversity on a lot of different metrics, makes us better because people are going to bring different sets of experiences with that. So if you've got, work in, say, the private sector and you want to bring that, we think that's a valuable thing to add as well. You just need to, again, use your application to convince us that this is, this is, a valuable, kind of thing that you really want to pursue.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, definitely a good option for folks already in the public sector or looking to be. Frank has a question. Do you have a breakdown of which sectors most students end up working in post-graduation, government, nonprofit, et cetera?
So I don't remember the exact figures. We had that chart from a year or two ago, but most of the people end up working in the government sector. The modal person goes to work in state and local government, and that's been the norm for many years at Fels. That said, there's always a robust presence in the nonprofit sector as well. Philadelphia actually has a pretty robust nonprofit community, so that's attractive to a lot of students. And then there's, will be a smaller percentage of folks who want to work in the private sector, right? Often in, kind of parts of the private sector that interface with the public sector. So one of my former students actually works for McKinsey, right? But she doesn't work with private sector clients. She works with public sector clients and helps them better, kind of work with private sector entities. So it's kind of a kind of third sector hybrid sort of job.
Yep. And I'll also mention there definitely are some every year that work in the federal government. Definitely a sweet spot if you are interested in local and state government for those areas, but good alumni presence in DC and folks working federally. Next question from Mattingly. Who is the admissions committee comprised of a private board, acting faculty? So who's on the admissions committee? And then is a financial aid letter given upon offer of admission or awarded later on?
Yeah, so the admissions committee is made up of faculty and staff with the program. So, it's folks like myself and Mindy and others. And so, it's people who have a good knowledge of what, let students succeed at Fels. And so, we work together collaboratively to make those decisions. And then the financial aid letter is sent at the same time. We would, for the full time, knock on wood, presuming no disruptions, be hoping to send those, early March-ish, because till we kind of have time to review all the applications, interview folks, make our decisions, kind of consult with the university, it usually takes us about that length of time. And for the executive program, as I mentioned, it's a kind of rolling process. So once we start reviewing those applications, as we review them as they come in, and we make our decisions both of admission and financial aid kind of in an ongoing process until the cohort is full, or it wraps up usually right around that deadline in May.
Great. Catherine has a question about alumni that work internationally and who took internationally focused electives.
Yeah, I mean, so there's, a few students who have done that. So I can think of two of them just off the top of my head. So one of them works for the City of London. Actually three. One works for the City of London, actually in their finance department. And so fun story, he took my stats class and was not thrilled about it, but then I got a very nice letter from him a year or two after, and he's like, I'm very sorry. I shouldn't have complained about your class because I use those skills every day in my new job, because he does a lot with the budget for the City of London. Another student, Hannah, who graduated 2 years ago, was very involved with kind of homelessness and youth services, and moved back to her native Scotland and works with the government agency there who's involved with those social services. And another student a few years further back, Fatima, actually went to work for the UN in Geneva on a kind of more international basis, I think for the High Commission on Human Rights. So there are going to be internationally focused electives, right? So for example, the School of Social Policy and Practice has a pretty big international focus. So they call it social policy and practice. Most other places just call it social work. Social policy and practice is just their name to make it sound kind of bigger. And then the Graduate School of Education actually also has an excellent international education program, which is something that a lot of our students are interested in. They do a lot of really interesting work on education in developing countries. So for folks that are interested in that, we every year seemingly have students who want to do a dual degree between the Graduate School of Education and Fels, people who want to work in education policy, both domestically and internationally. They have a real strength in both.
Great, yes, but I answered earlier. I forgot about the education electives, lots of good ones there too. So Blake wanted to clarify, thank you. Yes, so Fulbright, we would recognize that as experience that you'd had. It's just not associated with a specific scholarship, for sure. Great question from Nora. Can you speak to the alumni network? How do MPA students stay connected after graduation?
I mean, I think that the way they do it is they form really close ties with, one another. So we certainly have, alumni communications that we sent out. In fact, we were working on one just yesterday, the one to kind of kick off for the fall semester. But, I think that we, kind of have a formal structure with that, but the, different groups also have their own affiliated things. And I know from, I was actually invited to one of their weddings, and they got married here in Philadelphia, and there were a ton of other Fels alumni there, and they I think just keep in touch. And now it's sort of easier than ever with kind of electronic communication and LinkedIn. There's a huge LinkedIn group and groups on Facebook and other places. So I don't think it's really a challenge at all for folks to stay connected.
Yep, and just as a super recent example, right before this, I was on a cross-cohort mixer, so with the 3 current Fels cohorts, 2 executive and 1 full-time, and then the cohorts that just graduated all came. So it had, kind of continued relationships and engagement. They call it the super cohort group me, like a group texting, and that I think is a very valuable way. So they definitely find ways to stay connected. Question from Allison about dual degrees. Can you talk about how Fels works as part of a dual degree program?
Sure. So we've got a number of dual degrees, and the exact mechanics are going to vary from place to place. But we've got ones with the law school, with public health. We've got several with the different education programs. One with social policy, one with social work. Right. There's a whole variety of different ones. Basically, the way it works is that you cross-count some of your Fels classes for the other program, and you cross-count some of the other program classes for Fels, so that usually you're able to shave a little bit of time off of the degree program and save some money because of that, double counting. So for example, I think we have some dual degree programs that allow you to kind of do both masters in, 2 years, which is really kind of a nice accelerated format. And you save a little bit of money while you're doing it. So, basically you come and take, most of one program in 1 year and most of the other program the other year with a little bit of kind of mix over, and you write kind of a joint capstone between the 2 programs.
I would just add that I always would encourage folks interested in a dual degree to reach out to us. I encourage any of you to reach out to us because we really do get to know, students throughout the admissions process. But specifically, if you're interested in a dual degree, because there's pretty specific things to make sure that you understand, and you indicate that on your application. You do have to apply to both programs separately and get admitted separately. But I would say great to connect if that's the path that you're thinking of going. Question from Blake: do most grads go into state and local government work in Pennsylvania in the area, or are there also some in local government all over the country?
Yeah, so certainly the bulk of those folks are going to be, you know, here close by, right? Harrisburg, Newark, Trenton, right? New York, Maryland, right? So it's going to be, you know, kind of, let's say, like the Acela corridor, kind of where most folks are going to be. But there are certainly lots of other folks scattered throughout the country and around the world. So while it's strongest here, right, there are certainly alumni that are spread much broadly than just the kind of local region.
Great. A question from Catherine: when's the final deadline to accept an offer of admission if you are admitted? April 15th.
Yes.
Have a drink of water.
So we participate in the, I don't even remember what the group is that does it, but basically there's a kind of collective of schools that have April 15th as their deadline, and we do that as part of it. So that's for the full-time program. For the executive program, you know, it would be around that May 1st deadline. I mean, usually with the executive program, people sort of know that there aren't a lot of opportunities like that for working professionals. So most of those folks who apply, you know they're going to come and do it if they're admitted. So, you know, usually they just accept right away. If not, you know, as we're filling up that cohort, we would say to you like, hey, we need a decision.
Great. Question from Andrew: can you talk about the feasibility of completing the exec program if the student is not based in Philadelphia?
Yeah, this is totally feasible. I'll be honest, it is easiest if you're in Philadelphia and you have just a few more opportunities, right? If you're local, you can take classes that maybe a lot of the graduate classes at Penn in the professional master's programs like Fels meet, say, Tuesday evenings, 5 to 8 or something like that. So if you work locally, you know, you have a little bit more choice. You don't have to just take a, you know, remote or hybrid class. You could take an in-person class. You can come to more of our speakers and events. You can kind of just, we do as much as we can for the remote exec students, but there's obviously just more opportunities in general if you're local. But every year we have folks who come in from elsewhere in Pennsylvania, who come in from DC, and even come in from Florida, from Texas. A few years ago, it's someone from California, where, you know, they fly in for their executive weekend, and then they fly home, right? It's obviously going to take a little bit more planning if you're from further away, but it's totally doable. We're waiting. One thing I'll just say real quick is that if you know, I know sometimes you always come up with a question right after you leave. If that happens, or you just want to follow up on anything you talked about today, you know, you can contact us. Our information's on the website, and, you know, set up a time to speak further. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have, you know, questions or concerns, just want to talk more about, you know, the admissions process. You know, many would be more than happy to arrange that. Yeah, and she just put up the email in the chat.